specifically water, the loss of biodiversity, a decline in the quality of human life, the breakdown of society, and global inequality. He gives concrete information about each of these conditions and, along the way, makes these three very emphatic points. All things in nature, including we humans, are interconnected. All things in nature have intrinsic value, have dignity. And number three, there needs to be a unified approach to addressing these conditions. The first two of these themes, or these points, are two of the running themes of Laudato Si, and the third point is further addressed in the fourth chapter of the encyclical, and I'll talk about it at the end of the talk. Pope Francis makes it very clear in chapter 3 that there are human roots of the ecological crisis. This is actually the title of the chapter, and one of the themes he believes is important for us to consider. He highlights the technological progress we have made, and he believes that it is good. In paragraph 103, he states that, quote, technoscience, when well directed, can produce important means of improving quality of life. He goes on to name some of the results of our progress: useful domestic appliances, great transportation systems, bridges, and the like. Art and beauty are mentioned too. However, the very next paragraph, number 104, he tells us that our progress has given those with the knowledge, and especially the economic resources to use it, an impressive dominance over the whole of humanity and the entire world. That's a quote. Pope Francis notes, as many of us realize, that our ability to use what we have for good, our sense of ethics and responsibility, is far outstripped by the progress we have made. He says that we have certain superficial mechanisms, but we cannot claim to have a sound ethics, a culture and a spirituality genuinely capable of setting limits and teaching clear-minded restraint. That's number 105. And at the end of chapter 4, in the paragraph 162, Pope Francis pulls no punches and says that men and women of the post-modern world, that's us, run the risk of rampant individualism, and many problems of our society are connected with today's self-centered culture of instant gratification. Chapter 2 is entitled The Gospel of Creation. Pope Francis writes that the early stories of the book of Genesis are full of symbolism, and they, quote, bear witness to a conviction which we share today, that everything is interconnected, and that a genuine care for our lives and our relationships with nature is inseparable from fraternity, justice, and faithfulness to others. That's at number 70. I think Pope Francis would say that we can't love and seek to protect nature and hate the poor among us. They both need to be at the center of our lives and our hearts. The Pope reminds us that we are not God. He actually says that very clearly. We are not God. And that, quote, we must forcefully reject the notion that our being created in God's image and given dominion over the earth justifies absolute domination over other creatures. That's number 67. That's the quote that Father Dan Horan mentioned in the video that we saw earlier about how Pope Francis rejects the dominion model of creation. Just to make sure that we understand the point, at number 69, 2 paragraphs later, Pope Francis says that we are called to recognize that other living beings have a value of their own in God's eyes. He notes that the Catechism states in 2416 that, quote, by their means other living creatures, mere existence, by their mere existence, they bless Him and give Him glory. And here's the kicker, also at 69. Pope Francis tells us that, quote, by virtue of our unique dignity and our gift of intelligence, we are called to respect creation and its inherent laws. It's hard for me to think that way, though, if this mosquito is pestering me, buzzing around my head, or pollen that's kind of floating around and bothering me. It's hard to remember that we are to respect because we have intelligence and that we have dignity, our unique dignity, that we are called to respect creation and its inherent laws. And one final point about creation. Pope Francis tells us that the German bishops in 1980 wrote that where other creatures are concerned, and I assume this means people too, we can speak of the, quote, priority of being over that of being useful. The priority of being over that of being useful. Just as an example of that, when I wrote my final paper in graduate school, a doctoral student who was reading my paper made this exact same comment in relation to older people. I was writing about retirement and talking about working, and he said, you know, we have to remember that everyone has a unique sense of being. It's not just about doing, it's about being. And telling me that, you know, you have to remember that Pope Francis in Laudato Si talks about a throwaway culture, where we tend to throw away what it is that's not useful anymore, including other people. And that is just not something that we should be doing. So this doctor pointed out to me, I had to change my paper a little bit because it was really focused on doing rather than being. Chapter 2 also addresses our spirituality, how we see and experience God. Pope Francis says pretty clearly that, quote, a spirituality which forgets God as all-powerful and creator is not acceptable. That's number 75. He then reminds us that creation is more than us and the world that we see. In fact, he speaks of the universe, much of which is beyond our ordinary view. He tells us, his Théâtre Chaplet, his channel in Théâtre Chaplet, he tells us that the destiny of the universe itself is, quote, in the fullness of God, and that, quote, human beings, endowed with intelligence and love, and drawn by the fullness of Christ, are called to lead all creatures back to their Creator. And that no creature is excluded. No creature is excluded from this manifestation of God. That includes the buzzing mosquito that's around my head usually. Said in another way, Pope Francis writes that the universe as a whole, in all its manifold relationships, shows forth the inexhaustible riches of God. Number 86. Just an observation here, like any good judgment, Pope Francis is saying we can find God everywhere. That's one of the things that I know it's not just a Jesuit thing, but it really was a St. Ignatius thing, and something that the Jesuits talked about. Could see God in all things. These are very humbling words. It's not all about us. God is everywhere. All creatures manifest God. And we do have a tremendous responsibility to lead all creatures back to their Creator. Again, noting the theme of interconnectedness, Pope Francis writes that all of us are linked by unseen bonds, and together form a kind of universal family, a sublime communion which fills us with a sacred, affectionate, and humble respect. That's in number 89. And, as if we already didn't get it, the Pope says, quote, everything is connected. Concern for the environment thus needs to be joined to a sincere love for our fellow human beings and an unwavering commitment to resolving the problems of society. That's at number 91. So, how do we go about doing this? Loving our fellow human beings, taking care of the environment, and solving the problems of society. It's a very huge project. Perspectives, though, have to be addressed first. Looking at what Pope Francis writes, it seems that we, as individuals, as a country, and as a family of nations, need to see that all things, and that includes all of us humans, indeed are interconnected. And that's one of Pope Francis's prominent themes. He writes that environment means, quote, a relationship that exists between nature and the society which lives in it. It's paragraph 139. He goes further in the same paragraph and says that, quote, we are not faced with two separate crises, one environmental and the other social, but rather one complex crisis, which is both social and environmental. Strategies for solution demand an integrated approach to combating poverty, restoring dignity to the excluded, and at the same time, protecting nature. That's at number 139 as well. We are to be concerned about both the poor and our planet. Pope Francis considers the basis of these strategies to be what he calls an integral ecology, a study of an approach to our relationship with nature which takes a comprehensive look at all aspects of our existence, political, social, economic, cultural, and environmental, and sees them as interconnected. You cannot affect one without affecting another. Integral ecology is indeed the title of the fourth chapter of Laudato Si, and it appears to be one of the pathways that Pope Francis sees to a resolution of this rather one complex crisis that we face. Here are some other ideas that Pope Francis puts out there in Laudato Si to help us address this crisis. He says that we need to stop tolerating the enormous inequalities that are in our midst. He actually says that we should be particularly indignant at how we treat some people and creatures as worthy of more respect than others. That's in paragraph 90. A couple of paragraphs later, Pope Francis points out that we must be aware